She was hiding in plain sight, an award-winning chef working as a diner waitress. Nobody knew her secret until the day a billionaire walked in and recognized her food from 15 years ago. Just when he offered her the opportunity of a lifetime, her world came crashing down. Her daughter couldn't graduate. The rent was due, and she had to make an impossible choice. This story will make you cry, but I promise it ends beautifully. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button. Comment your view on the story and where you are watching from. Have you ever wondered how a single moment can change everything? How one plate of food, prepared with love, could unlock a future you thought was lost forever? Let me tell you a story that will touch your heart. In the small town of Riverside, just outside of Chicago, there stood a little family restaurant called Maple Street Cafe. It wasn't fancy. The chairs were old, the tables had seen better days, and the paint on the walls was starting to fade. But every morning, the smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, and regular customers came in like they were visiting an old friend. Behind the counter, a woman named Grace Bennett moved quietly through her work. She was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and gentle hands that never rushed. When she served your food, it felt like she was taking care of you, the way a mother takes care of her child. Most people who came to Maple Street Cafe knew her as the quiet waitress who remembered everyone's order and always had a warm smile, even when life was hard. But what they didn't know was Grace's secret. Before life turned upside down, she had been someone completely different. She had been the head chef at one of Boston's most famous restaurants. She had won awards. Food critics had written articles about her cooking. She had been on her way to opening her own restaurant, living the dream she and her husband had built together. Then everything changed in one terrible night. Grace lived with her 16-year-old daughter, Lily. Just the two of them, making their way in the world. Lily was a bright girl, full of dreams and hope, studying hard at her school. Grace worked double shifts sometimes, doing whatever it took to give her daughter a good life. But no matter how hard she worked, the bills kept piling up, and the dreams she once had felt like they belonged to someone else, someone from a different lifetime. On this particular morning, the breakfast rush was slowing down. Grace was wiping down the counter when she heard a car pull up outside. She glanced through the window and saw an expensive black car, the kind that didn't usually stop at places like Maple Street Cafe. A tall man in a perfect suit stepped out, looking around like he wasn't quite sure he was in the right place. Grace recognized him immediately. Everyone in Chicago knew Daniel Westfield. He was a billionaire, the kind of man whose buildings shaped the city skyline. He was younger than she expected, maybe in his mid-40s, with gray hair at his temples and eyes that looked tired, like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Good morning, sir," Grace said as he walked in. "Table for one?" Daniel nodded and slid into a corner booth. He kept checking his phone, his hands shaking just slightly. Grace had learned over the years that everyone had their struggles, rich or poor. Money couldn't fix everything. "Just coffee, please," he said. "Black." Grace poured his coffee, noticing the exhaustion in his face. This was a man who hadn't slept well in days. When she set the cup down, he looked up at her. "Actually," he said, his voice uncertain, "what would you recommend? I haven't had a real meal in days." Grace studied him for a moment. Behind the expensive suit and the powerful presence, she saw someone who was hurting. Someone who needed comfort. "Our special today is pan-seared trout with herb rice," she said softly. "It's simple food, but sometimes that's exactly what we need. Food that feels like home." "Fine," he said. "Whatever you think." As Grace walked toward the kitchen, she made a decision. Instead of placing the standard order, she began preparing the dish herself. Her hands moved with a skill that had been sleeping inside her for 15 years. She selected the freshest herbs, the best piece of fish. She remembered techniques she had perfected long ago, in kitchens that now felt like a dream. The trout sizzled in the pan, and the smell of rosemary and butter filled the small kitchen. She prepared the rice with patience, the way she used to, making sure every grain was perfect. This wasn't just diner food anymore. This was art. This was love on a plate. When she placed the dish in front of Daniel 15 minutes later, his eyes widened. This wasn't what he expected from a small-town cafe. He took a bite. Then he stopped. His fork froze halfway to his mouth, and he stared at the plate like he'd just seen a ghost. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Who made this?" Grace felt her heart begin to race. After 3 years of hiding, after 3 years of being invisible, had one plate of food just revealed everything? "I did, sir," she said quietly, her hands clasped behind her back. Is something wrong? Daniel set down his fork slowly. His eyes never left her face. Wrong. He shook his head. This is identical to a dish I had 15 years ago, at a restaurant called River House in Boston. Exactly the same. Every detail. Grace felt the room spin. River House. The restaurant where she had poured her heart and soul. Where she had created that very recipe. Where her entire world had fallen apart. I think you must be mistaken, sir, she said, though her voice betrayed her. It's just our regular special. But Daniel was shaking his head, and there was something in his eyes now. Recognition. Understanding. No, he said. I know this dish. I ate it every week for 2 years. He paused, studying her face. Wait, you're her. You're Grace Laurent, the chef. And just like that, the past caught up with the present, and Grace's carefully built walls began to crumble. Hearing her old name spoken aloud felt like a punch to the chest. Grace looked around the cafe, grateful that it was quiet. Old Mr. Peterson was reading his newspaper in the corner booth, and Mrs. Chun was focused on her breakfast. No one else was listening. Please, Grace whispered, her voice shaking. I don't know what you're talking about. But Daniel was already standing, his face full of emotion. You won the Rising Star Chef Award in 2009, he said. You were on the cover of Culinary Excellence magazine. They said you were going to be the next big name in American cooking. You were about to open your own restaurant, until... He trailed off, and his expression changed. The excitement faded, replaced by something deeper. Until the accident. Grace's hands trembled. The memories came flooding back like a wave she couldn't stop. The night that changed everything. The phone call at 3 a.m. Her husband James, driving home from his shift at the hospital. A drunk driver. 3 blocks from their apartment. Gone in an instant. That life is over, Grace said, and her voice broke. Please. I just want to work in peace. Daniel's entire demeanor changed. The businessman disappeared, and in his place stood someone who understood pain. I remember reading about it, he said gently. I'm so sorry. But Grace, your talent. Why are you hiding here? Grace felt something rise up in her chest. 15 years of holding everything inside. Because talent doesn't pay the rent, she said, and there was fire in her voice now. Because talent doesn't put food on the table or pay for my daughter's school. Because when tragedy strikes, the culinary world moves on without you. Because sometimes starting over means starting simple. The bell above the door chimed, and the lunch crowd began to trickle in. Grace looked toward the kitchen, knowing she had work to do. But Daniel gently touched her arm. What if you could have both, he asked. Security in your calling? What if you didn't have to choose? Before Grace could answer, the door burst open again. This time it was Lily, her daughter, still in her school uniform. And she was crying. Mom, Lily said, her voice breaking. They're saying I can't graduate. The tuition check bounced again. Grace felt her 2 worlds collide. The life she had lost and the daughter she would do anything to protect. Right here, right now, in front of this stranger who had somehow recognized her secret. Baby, what are you talking about? Grace asked, pulling Lily aside. Her face burned with embarrassment. This was private. This wasn't supposed to happen in front of anyone. Mrs. Harrison called me to the office, Lily said through her tears. She said if we don't have the money by Friday, I can't walk at graduation. Mom, all my friends will be there. I've worked so hard for this. Grace felt her heart shatter. She had worked so hard to give Lily everything. But it was never enough. No matter how many shifts she took, no matter how hard she tried, they were always one step behind. Daniel watched this moment unfold. He had spent 15 years building an empire, making deals, acquiring properties. But nothing had prepared him for this. For witnessing a mother's quiet desperation and a daughter's broken dreams. How much? He asked quietly. Sir, please, Grace said, her pride fighting against her fear. This isn't your concern. $3,000, Lily said, wiping her eyes. It's for my senior year fees and graduation expenses. I know we don't have it. I know it might as well be $3 million. Daniel reached for his phone, but Grace stepped forward. Her voice was firmer now. No, I don't accept charity. I've never taken handouts, and I won't start now. It wouldn't be charity, Daniel said, his mind already working. It would be an investment. In what? Grace asked. In you. In your gift. He looked around the humble cafe, then back at Grace. I've been searching for someone for months now, he said. My company is opening a flagship restaurant in our new downtown development. Not just any restaurant. Something that will define Chicago's dining scene. I need a head chef who understands both excellence and heart. Grace stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You don't understand, she said. I've been out of that world for 15 years. I haven't worked in a real kitchen. I haven't created a menu. I haven't. Haven't what? Daniel interrupted. Haven't poured love into every dish you make here? Haven't turned basic ingredients into something extraordinary? He pointed to his plate. This trout, made with limited resources and basic equipment, is better than anything I've eaten in the most expensive restaurants in the world. That doesn't happen by accident. Lily looked between her mother and this stranger who was offering them a lifeline. Mom, she said softly, you never told me you used to be famous. I wasn't famous, sweetheart, Grace said. I was just different then. Daniel sat back down, his voice gentle but insistent. The position comes with a 6-figure salary, full benefits, and a signing bonus that would cover Lily's education through college. All I need is someone who cooks with their soul, not just their skill. The cafe fell silent. The other customers continued their conversations, completely unaware of the life-changing moment happening in the corner booth. Grace looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then at this man who had somehow seen past her uniform to the person she used to be. Why? She whispered. Why me? You could hire anyone. Anyone in the world. Daniel's answer was simple, but it carried the weight of truth. Because 15 years ago, your food saved my life. The words hung in the air like a sacred promise. Grace searched Daniel's face for any sign of deception, but found only raw honesty in his eyes. My father died when I was 28, Daniel said, his voice steady but vulnerable. I inherited a company that was drowning in debt. Every business advisor told me to sell, to walk away. But it was my father's legacy. How could I just let it go? He looked down at his hands, remembering. Every night for 2 years, I would sit in your restaurant. I'd order this same dish, the pan-seared trout with herb rice. I'd sit there with my notebooks and my loan applications and my rejection letters, trying to figure out how to save everything my father had built. Grace felt tears forming in her eyes. She remembered those nights. The young man who always sat alone in the corner, who always ordered the same thing, who would stay for hours, working through stacks of papers, looking like the weight of the world was crushing him. I remember you, she whispered. You always asked for the corner table. You'd spread your papers everywhere. Business plans. Financial statements. Daniel nodded, a sad smile on his face. Your staff probably thought I was crazy, sitting there for hours over one meal. But that dish. He paused, searching for the right words. That perfect combination of flavors reminded me that excellence was still possible. That something beautiful could come from simple ingredients if you put enough care into it. Your food wasn't just nourishment. It was hope on a plate. Lily watched this exchange with growing amazement. She was seeing a side of her mother she had never known existed. Mom, she said softly, is this really happening? Before Grace could answer, Frank, the cafe's owner, appeared from the kitchen. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He had obviously heard enough to understand what was going on. Grace, honey, he said firmly. You take this opportunity and you run with it. Don't you dare look back. But Frank, Grace protested. You've been so good to me. I can't just leave you. Frank laughed, shaking his head. Good to you? Girl, you've tripled my business just by being here. Half my customers come back because of that magic you do with our everyday ingredients. I always knew you were meant for bigger things. I was just grateful to have you here as long as I did. Daniel stood up, extending his hand to Grace. I'm not asking you to decide right now, he said. Come see the space tomorrow. Bring Lily. Let me show you what we're building. If it doesn't feel right, walk away. No hard feelings. But if it does, Grace looked at her daughter's hopeful face, at Frank's encouraging nod, at this man who somehow remembered her food from 15 years ago, who claimed it had given him hope when he needed it most. She thought about James, about the dreams they had shared, about the restaurant they had planned to open together. They were going to call it Grace and James, a place where food was made with love, where every guest felt like family. Maybe this wasn't the path they had envisioned, but perhaps it was still a path forward. Perhaps James would want her to take this chance. Okay, she said quietly. Then stronger. Yes. I'll come see it. Daniel smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back. Here's my direct number, he said. And Grace. He handed her an envelope. Consider this an advance on your signing bonus. Make sure Lily walks at her graduation. Sir, I can't. You can, and you will, Daniel said firmly. Because in 20 minutes, you reminded me why I fell in love with your cooking in the first place. Excellence isn't about expensive ingredients or fancy techniques. It's about putting your heart into everything you create. As Daniel left the cafe, Grace held the envelope with shaking hands. She knew that inside was more than just money. It was a second chance. A doorway back to the life she thought was lost forever. Mom, Lily said, hugging her tightly. I'm so proud of you. Grace held her daughter close, feeling 15 years of grief and struggle finally begin to lift. She had been so focused on survival, on just getting through each day, that she had forgotten what it felt like to dream. That night, after her shift ended, Grace sat in her small apartment with Lily. They opened the envelope together. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a handwritten note. Grace, it read. This isn't charity. This is paying back a debt. 15 years ago, when I was at my lowest point, your food gave me hope. It reminded me that beauty and excellence still existed in the world. Because of you, I didn't give up. Because of you, I found the strength to keep fighting. Now it's my turn to give you hope. Let me help you reclaim the gift you've been hiding. The world needs your cooking. More importantly, you need to cook again. Not just to survive, but to thrive. See you tomorrow. Daniel. Grace read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Lily held her hand, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Dad would be so happy, Lily whispered. He always said your cooking could change the world. Grace looked at the old photograph on her mantel. James, smiling at the camera, his arm around her shoulders. They had been so young, so full of dreams. She had thought those dreams died with him that terrible night. But maybe, just maybe, they had only been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up again. Tomorrow, she would visit Daniel's restaurant space. Tomorrow, she would take the first step back into the world she had left behind. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, Grace stood in front of her closet, staring at clothes she hadn't worn in years. In the back, behind the uniforms and simple dresses, hung a chef's jacket. White pressed, with her name embroidered on it. Grace Laurent. She pulled it out, running her fingers over the fabric. It still fit perfectly. Lily appeared in the doorway, already dressed and ready to go. You look beautiful, Mom, she said. Grace smiled, but her hands were shaking. She was terrified. What if she had lost her skills? What if 15 years was too long? What if Daniel took one look at her in a real kitchen and realized he had made a terrible mistake? What if I fail? Grace whispered. Lily came over and took her mother's hands. Mom, you've been cooking with love every single day for 15 years. That doesn't just disappear. And even if this doesn't work out, at least you tried. At least you didn't let fear win. Those words, so wise from someone so young, gave Grace the courage she needed. The restaurant space was in downtown Chicago, in one of Daniel's newest buildings. When they arrived, Grace stood outside for a moment, looking up at the gleaming glass and steel structure. This was a different world from Maple Street Cafe. Daniel met them at the entrance, his face lighting up when he saw them. Grace, Lily, welcome, he said warmly. Come, let me show you what we're building. He led them through the space, and with each step, Grace felt something stirring inside her. The dining room was beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The space was elegant but warm, modern but inviting. It didn't feel cold or pretentious. It felt like a place where people could gather, share stories, and feel at home. We've designed it to seat 150 guests, Daniel explained. But we want it to feel intimate. Every table should feel like the most important table in the room. Then he opened the doors to the kitchen, and Grace's breath caught in her throat. It was magnificent. State-of-the-art equipment. Spacious workstations. Everything a chef could dream of. But more than that, it was designed thoughtfully. She could see how the workflow would move, how a team could work together efficiently. This wasn't just a kitchen. This was a sanctuary for creating art. What do you think? Daniel asked, watching her face. Grace walked slowly through the space, her fingers trailing over the counters. She could already imagine dishes coming to life here. She could see her team moving in harmony, creating beautiful food that would nourish both body and soul. It's perfect, she whispered. But Daniel, I have to be honest with you. She turned to face him, her voice trembling. I'm scared. What if I can't do this anymore? What if I've been away too long? What if I let you down? Daniel walked over to her, his expression serious but kind. Let me tell you something about fear, he said. When I inherited my father's company, I was terrified. Every day I thought I would fail. Every decision felt like it could be the one that destroyed everything. But you know what kept me going? What? Grace asked, remembering that trout dish. Remembering how something so seemingly simple could be so extraordinary. You taught me that excellence isn't about being fearless. It's about caring so deeply that you push through the fear. Lily, who had been quietly exploring the space, called out from across the kitchen. Mom, come look at this. She was standing by a window that overlooked a small herb garden on the building's terrace. Daniel said if you take the job, you can grow your own herbs right here, Lily said, her eyes shining. Just like you always talked about doing with Dad. Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks. James had always dreamed of having an herb garden at their restaurant. He used to say that food tasted better when you could pick the herbs with your own hands, when you knew exactly where everything came from. Daniel cleared his throat gently. I want to make you an offer, he said. But not just as an employee. I want you as a partner. I'll provide the space, the resources, and the business infrastructure. You provide the vision, the menu, and the heart. We split the profits 60-40 in your favor. This isn't just my restaurant. It would be ours. What do you say? Grace stood there, overwhelmed. A partnership. Not just a job, but ownership. A real stake in something beautiful. Why would you do this? She asked. You barely know me. I know your food, Daniel said simply. And I know your character. In 15 years, you've never given up. You've worked hard, raised a daughter alone, and never lost the ability to put love into everything you create. That's the kind of person I want as a partner. Grace looked at Lily, who was nodding enthusiastically. She looked at the kitchen, at the herb garden, at this beautiful space that could become a new beginning. She thought about James, about how he would tell her to be brave, about how he always believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. I have one condition, Grace said, her voice steady now. If we do this, we do it right. I want to hire people who need second chances, like I got. Single parents, people who faced hardship, people who might not fit the traditional mold, but who have heart and determination. Daniel extended his hand, a huge smile spreading across his face. I wouldn't have it any other way. As Grace shook his hand, she felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, but it was quieter now. In its place was something she hadn't felt in 15 years. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. 6 months later, Grace stood in the kitchen of Heritage, the name they had chosen for the restaurant. It was opening night, and the dining room was packed with guests. Food critics from across the country had come to Chicago. Local media was covering the event. But Grace wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the team she had built. Her sous chef, Amanda, was a single mother of 3 who had been working in fast food until Grace found her. Her pastry chef, Raphael, had spent 5 years in prison for a mistake he made as a young man, and no one would give him a chance until Grace did. Every person in her kitchen had a story, had faced struggles, had needed someone to believe in them. 2 more orders for the pan-seared trout, Amanda called out, her voice strong and confident. And the table by the window wants to send their compliments to the chef. They said the risotto made them cry. Grace smiled, her hands moving with practiced grace as she plated another dish. This was what she had been missing. Not just the cooking, but the connection. The knowledge that her food was touching people's hearts, not just filling their stomachs. The kitchen doors swung open, and Lily appeared, wearing a server's uniform. She had decided to take a gap year before culinary school, wanting to work alongside her mother and learn the business from the ground up. Mom, Lily said, her face glowing with pride. You need to come out here. They're asking for you. Grace wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into the dining room. The applause started immediately. Guests stood up, clapping and cheering. Some were wiping away tears. Grace felt overwhelmed by the love in the room. Daniel approached her, carrying a framed newspaper review. Have you seen this? He asked, his eyes bright with joy. The headline read, Heritage, where soul meets excellence. The review went on to praise not just the exceptional cuisine, but the warmth and humanity that permeated every aspect of the restaurant. The critic had written, Grace Lauron doesn't just feed you. She nourishes your spirit. This is food that reminds us why we gather around tables, why we break bread together, why cooking is one of humanity's most sacred acts. Grace felt tears streaming down her face. But these were different tears than the ones she had cried for 15 years. These were tears of joy. Frank appeared from the crowd, his face beaming with pride. True to his word, Daniel had helped him expand Maple Street Cafe into 3 locations, with Grace consulting on the menu development. Frank had even hired 2 new cooks, giving them the same chance he had given Grace. "Look at you," Frank said, pulling her into a hug. "I always knew you were destined for this." The evening continued, course after course leaving the kitchen. Each plate was a small work of art, but more importantly, each one was made with love. Grace had insisted on keeping some of the humble touches that had made Maple Street Cafe special. Every guest was greeted personally. Special requests were not just accommodated, but celebrated. The staff was trained to treat every person who walked through the door like family. As the last guests were leaving, an elderly woman approached Grace. Her eyes were red from crying. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice shaking with emotion. "My husband passed away 6 months ago. This is the first time I've felt joy since he died. Your food reminded me that beauty still exists in the world." Grace held the woman's hands, understanding that pain all too well. "I lost my husband too," Grace said softly. 15 years ago. And you're right, beauty does still exist. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us." After the last guest left and the kitchen was cleaned, the team gathered for a toast. Daniel raised his glass. "To Grace," he said, "who taught me 15 years ago that excellence matters. Who taught me 6 months ago that second chances can change lives. And who reminded all of us that cooking is an act of love." "To Grace," everyone cheered. But Grace raised her own glass and looked around at these beautiful faces. "No," she said. "To all of us. To everyone who has been knocked down and found the courage to stand back up. To everyone who has faced darkness and chosen hope. To everyone who believes that our past doesn't define our future." Later that night, when everyone had gone home, Grace stood alone in the empty dining room. Lily had driven back to the apartment, exhausted but happy. Daniel had left with promises to meet tomorrow to discuss expansion plans. The city lights twinkled through the windows. Grace pulled out her phone and looked at the photograph she carried with her always. James, smiling at the camera, full of life and love. "We did it, baby," she whispered. "Not exactly the way we planned, but we did it. I hope you're proud." She could almost hear his voice, feel his presence. He would be proud. She knew that. He would be proud of how she had survived, how she had raised their daughter, how she had found her way back to her gift. The restaurant was called Heritage for a reason. It honored the past while building toward the future. It celebrated where we come from while recognizing where we're going. It understood that our struggles make us stronger, that our pain can become our purpose, that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the hardest soil. As Grace locked the door and walked out into the Chicago night, she felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years. Complete. Not because she had achieved success or recognition, but because she had learned that it's never too late to begin again. That talent combined with heart can overcome any obstacle. That one act of kindness can ripple out and change lives in ways we never imagine. And most importantly, that the people we love never really leave us. They live on in the things we create, in the love we share, in the dreams we finally find the courage to chase. Grace's story wasn't just about food or restaurants or second chances. It was about the human spirit's incredible ability to heal, to hope, and to rise again. And in the end, that's the most beautiful recipe of all. The end.